Hello and welcome back to Bigfoot Lake. Tonight we have two stories of Bigfoot encounters, and these encounters couldn't be any more different. One tells the tale of a absolutely brutal encounter in a deep, dark swamp, and the second story is exactly the opposite. It tells the story of possible even friendship that had developed. So, with that being said, pull up a stump, sit back, relax, and let's dive into these two stories of Bigfoot encounters. Our first story begins on the Georgia-Florida line. The Okefenokee Swamp is a shallow 438,000 acre wetland which straddles the Georgia-Florida line. It's the largest blackwater swamp in North America. Blackwater is a type of slow-moving water flowing through forested swamps or wetlands. As the vegetation decays, it leaches tannins into the water, and it makes the water acidic, and it stains this water resembling a dark black tea. It's also home to deadly poisonous snakes, quicksand, panthers, and of course, gators. Today, much of the area has been designated as a park and refuge. You can even take guided tours through the swamp. This certainly wasn't always the case. In 1829, the first settlers were just pushing into the fringes of the swamp. Surrounded by the stunning beauty of the swamp, they soon learned of an Indian legend that spoke of a mysterious race of people who lived on an island deep in that dark wilderness. The legend states that a group of Indian hunters had gone into the swamp and become lost. When they were in a desperate condition, a party of the most beautiful women they had ever seen came to their rescue. They were lost in those dark swamps and bogs and on the point of perishing, but were unexpectedly rescued by a company of beautiful women whom they call Daughters of the Sun, who kindly gave them such provisions as they had with them, consisting of fruit and corn cakes. Now the women warned the hunters to flee as fast as possible to their own country, because their husbands were fierce men and cruel to strangers. These men of the swamp were said by the Creek Indians to be of gigantic stature and both cruel and warlike. So, with that legend in mind, let's continue with our story. The winter of 1828 to 1829 was extremely dry, and two men living on the edges of the swamp decided to explore as deep into it as they could. Accompanied by a boy, they went into the Okefenokee, and over the course of 2 weeks they continued to penetrate deeper and deeper into the darkness. As they explored the very heart of the swamp, they made a startling discovery. Gigantic footprints. The length of the foot was 18 inches and the width was 9 inches. Absolutely massive. The stride between the prints was over 6 feet. What kind of monster could have left these tracks? The two men, they had seen enough, and they ended their expedition. They hastily retreated out of the darkness of Okefenokee Swamp. Upon arrival back home, they related to their friends and neighbors what they had seen. Their story excited the curiosity of a group of hunters who lived just across the Florida line. There were 9 of them in total. They readied themselves and set out for the Okefenokee. They plunged into the darkness of the Blackwater Swamp to find the mysterious giant. They were guided by one of the 2 men who found those massive tracks just days prior. The group of hunters followed for several days. The direction of their guide, they finally came upon the track first discovered, which was still remaining after the passing of time. The group followed the giant footprints several days longer until they came to a halt on a little rise in the swamp's elevation. There, they decided to set up their camp and refresh themselves for the day. After getting camp established, the hunters' next step was to prepare their guns for the next day. This would require them to discharge their guns so they could reload with fresh powder. As they fired, the swamp came alive. Something absolutely massive charged from the darkness of the thick vegetation straight towards them. In an instant, it was in full view and in the camp, with a savage look upon its face, lunging towards the hunters. The hunters instinctively gathered close into one body and raised their rifles. The huge being didn't hesitate and bounded upon his victims, and in the same instant he received the contents of those 7 rifles. The fight, however, did not end there. The creature did not fall alone. Not until he had unleashed his wrath with the death of 5 of the hunters, which he accomplished by wringing the head from the body. Writhing in agony and exhausted, the creature finally fell, with his helpless prey beneath in his grasp. As the creature lay dying on the ground, writhing and sometimes roaring, the few who survived the attack gathered around it to make a closer inspection. The creature was found to measure 13 feet from head to toe, and his width and volume of similar proportions. Immediately fearful that the dying monster's cries might attract others of its kind, the hunters fled the swamp. The men who died in the battle with the creature were left lying right where they had fallen. Now, this encounter in the Okefenokee swamp is one of the earliest written reports of an encounter with a Bigfoot-type creature by a non-Native American. And I think it's safe to say this is also one of the most brutal accounts ever recorded. So, what do you think of this first encounter? This encounter deep in that Blackwater swamp, the Okefenokee. Have you heard similar stories or reports from the Okefenokee area, or perhaps a different swamp? Or maybe you live near this area or grew up near this area. If you have any other reports, we would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear the circumstances of those encounters. So that's our first encounter for tonight. And like we said, it is a absolutely brutal encounter on these hunters. And from that encounter, we're going to move to an encounter that is on the exact opposite end of the spectrum. It is actually a friendship. So with that said, let's begin our second story of the night. The second encounter begins in Salmon River, Idaho County in Idaho, and this was during the 1940s. When I was growing up in Idaho during the 1940s, my father had a ranch in the Salmon River region. We did not live there, but we went up to the ranch every week, flying into the Salmon River Airport in Dad's airplane. He had a man named Hiram with a horse and a German shepherd who cared for the ranch and the livestock. While business was being taken care of by the men, I was very bored. I would explore the ranch area all day long. I found a place on the ranch where a spring ran through. The trees were tall and there was a lot of brush. It was my little haven and a secret place. One day while there, I heard a noise in the brush and was startled to see a huge creature venture out towards me. At first, I was frightened, thinking it was a bear. As the creature came closer, I felt as if it was trying to calm and reassure me that I was not in any danger. The creature acted like a female with a motherly attitude. I felt comfortable with her. We sat on a log and she held my hand, placing her gentle hand on my knee. I talked to her and she responded with low, deep tones and nods of understanding. After about 30 minutes or so, another creature appeared and seemed angry. My new friend stood up and sneered at the other one and put him in his place. He must have been a male. I assumed he was her mate. He would always be there after that, but would stay back and sort of brood. I went back to my haven every time we visited the ranch and always met both of them there. Once the female brought a young creature there for me to meet. I felt it must have been an offspring of hers. My parents sold the ranch in the early 1950s, and I have never been back. I never did have a chance to say goodbye to my friends, which I would have liked to have done. I told my mother about my friends, but she did not believe a word of my story. She marveled at my imagination, but suggested I stop making up stories like that. I never mentioned the subject again. My friends stood about 7 to 8 feet tall, and the younger one about 5 feet. The male seemed a bit taller than the female. They had long, stringy-looking hair over their whole bodies. Their color was a dirty off-white with darker hair on the more exposed areas. They both had flat faces with dark, squinty eyes. When the male acted irate, his eyes burned black and larger. He actually would strut around trying to show that he was tough and in charge, but the female always kept him under control and made him act more gently toward me. I had never heard of Bigfoot or Yeti as a child, but now I know who my friends were. They will always be a part of my childhood and remembered dearly. They were not the imagination of a child because I talked and visited with them on a regular basis. I'm sure their offspring are still in the primitive areas of Idaho, living as nature intended. So that concludes our second story. Absolutely amazing story of a friendship, of a child growing up. It's a phenomenal story. They would visit this ranch as the family would go there, and each and every time she would meet with her friends. So this is a direct opposite of our first story, that brutal encounter of the dark Okefenokee swamp, to this almost loving encounter with this motherly female Bigfoot. So what do you guys think of the second story? Have you heard of other encounters of a type of friendship that's been established between a person and one of these creatures? If so, I'd love to hear your story. Perhaps leave a comment, or if you're from this Salmon River, Idaho area, I'd also love to hear from you. Has any of you heard other stories from that region or anything strange in that area? If so, reach out. Would love to hear from you. So I hope you enjoyed the two stories for tonight from opposite ends of the Bigfoot spectrum, from one of brutality to one of a loving, mother-like figure. So I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us here tonight. We appreciate you all. If you liked the video, hit that thumbs up. It means a lot to us. Hope you all have a great night, and we'll see you on the next.